We all know education is one of the biggest things in the industry at the moment. It's why we've created the XY Advisor platform. It allows advisors to do short 4-week courses. And what we're really keen to do is to get as many awesome content providers in there. So if you're an advisor or a service provider who have put together an awesome solution which can affect change in the way an advisor does their job on a Monday morning, please do put together an application for us at www.xyadvisor.com.
Vince Scully. Welcome.
Adrian, Patty, how are you?
Good, man. It's great to have you on here. It's not your first time, is it?
No, it's not.
So
there are not too many first-time experiences left when you get to my age.
Oh.
Yep.
Someone get the violin out. But you weren't on the actual in the studio.
No, I was sitting in my office with my earbuds in.
With that mini sound delay that just means that you can sometimes miss.
It's so much better now.
That's right.
It's so much better. So it's hey, cheers, man. Welcome to the
Cheers,
studio.
Clayton.
Woo!
So, Life Sherpa's a cool. I'm still going to give it startup status. Not from a stage of business, but just from an innovation standpoint. It's a bit of a disruptor, you might say. Would you?
Well, how long's it been around for now?
Well, as a concept, it's been around for nearly 4 or 5 years, but we've been live for 2 years. Almost 2 years.
Well, startup's fair then.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Oh, I like the side of startups where people think like, well, they're doing something new, and this is like certainly what you've been doing the last few years. And I guess for some people that don't know about what the journey's been like, would you like to share?
Sure. Well, the concept behind Life Sherpa was financial advice for people without any money. And that may sound a bit silly, but what I mean by that is that it's the unadvised portion of the population. We've all heard those numbers about 20% of the population is the only people who've seen a financial planner. Well, there's actually a really good reason for that. And that is when you look at Australia's 8.6 million households, only 20% of them have more than $100,000 of non-super investable assets. So if you're running a business that's fundamentally around assets under management, well, actually, that's a full market. Now, that's not to say it's a bad business, because if you take 19,000 financial planners, 1.9 million households, that's 100 each, which is a pretty good business.
And the numbers are about to get rejigged over the next few years, so it's probably going to be about 150 per planner on those stats.
Exactly.
What do you mean?
There's going to be an attrition in AR statuses.
What are you trying to say, Paddy?
What
are you trying to say?
Well, there's a number of variaribles coming into play.
Are you bearish on advisor numbers?
I am very bearish on advisor numbers.
How come?
Education standards, business model disruption, removal of grandfathering potential. There's a lot of things that would edge a lot of people out of the industry because it's a complete change required for some businesses to what's been done over the last few years. So,
yeah, I'm not sure I fully agree with that.
You don't reckon?
I'm sure there's lots of change coming, but is it any more than the change we've had over the last 25 years? Yeah, this is an industry that's gone from financial advice 1.0, which was selling insurance and selling managed funds, to 2.0, which was strategy used to sell products. And now,
tell me about 3.0.
Financial advice 3.0 is about focusing on actually giving advice, which requires products for implementation. And I think that's the fundamental change that we're seeing. Now, lots of people who started in this game 30 years ago may not have kept up with that and could get away with it for the last 20 years. But I think that's where the change is happening. And most of those people are going to be, 55, 60 plus, and many still have bowlers. So
what is that? What do you think is going to happen?
I think there will be some attrition, but it will be at that very upper end, and most of them have clients who are older than themselves. So there's sort of 20 years of life left for those advisors.
Booming year for aged care specialists.
Yeah.
So that third level, I'd argue there's almost like a fourth level above that.
3.0.1.
I'd even give it a 4.0 actually.
Yeah, what's that?
Well, so you delved into the strategy space and the technical space, but like really, like when you go further above that, it's actually what's a higher value proposition? It's the relationship, the behavioural side of things, and what's happening there. Like you've done a lot in that space.
Absolutely, and this whole behavioural thing is the key to it. So, and I think Vanguard even did some numbers on this. I can't remember the fancy word they use for it. What comes after alpha, beta, gamma,
delta, epsilon,
gamma. Anyway, they
Epsilon.
coined.
I don't know. Echo.
I learned
Epsilon.
Or I learned the Greek alphabet when I was in primary school. So that's how
It's the one link you have to your heritage.
Yeah. My grandma's still not very impressed with my...
So it's actually Patigopoulos or something, is it?
No, it actually used to be Varipatis.
Varipatis.
Yeah. And like 1940s
Australia.
Greek family growing up in Tamworth, they thought they'd anglicise it a little bit. So
Fair enough.
they turned me Irish.
It's actually O-Patty.
Yes.
Or Muck-Patty.
Yeah. Well, my alcohol consumption would match that.
Holla.
So you ran the Euro shop in Tamworth, did you?
I did. My dad they had a cafe there actually, and my father used to. I think they didn't have it till he was too much older, but when he was little, he used to sort of be at the cash register. Think about those like little corner stores in the suburbs where the kids still come up and they take the cash. That was what he used to do.
Cash money special.
Yeah, exactly. There was no pay pass going on back then.
But getting back to behaviour, I think Vanguard did some numbers where they suggested that of the 3% a year that financial advisor could add for their client, 2 point something of it came from behaviour. They're not precise numbers, but go Google the Vanguard report. It's good reading, and that's really where I come from. I think the vast bulk of this is behaviour. Personal finance is called personal finance for a reason because it's personal, and I see lots of people who manage big budgets at work, $1 million budgets at work, and have no problems with it. But their own finances are a mess. And why is that? It's because emotions get in the way.
Totally.
And what we got to do is develop techniques to manage those emotions, and that's where a good advisor comes in.
And what do you suggest?
Well, I mean, there's lots of ways you can do it. At Life Sherpa, we focus on, three things that we start with. The first one is personality, and we got a personality profile of that.
The clients have to have one? Or?
Yes, which is why we don't have accountants and actuaries as clients.
He will have something to say to you about that.
Well, as an accountant, I think I can say that.
Touche. So you figure out their personality.
Yeah. So there's, as advisors, we've always looked at risk, risk tolerance and ability to wear risk. But there's 12 other psychological traits that actually make up how we deal with money. They're things like involvement. So we've all had those engineers and teachers as clients who want to second guess everything we do. Well, they will generally profile with a high involvement score. You have people who've got high work ethic. They believe that success comes from work. It's not about luck. And others who believe it's about luck. There are others who have got a lot of altruism and trust. They trust that other people will generally look after their money. They think that they should look after other people. So all those traits go together to make up explain why you do what you do when it comes to money. And so that's where we start.
Interesting. What's the name of that test?
Or we call it the Life Sherpa Money Personality Profiler.
Oh, there you go. Okay, very cool.
So we actually license some of the underlying technology out of the US, but we host the quiz and process the answers.
Awesome.
But the underlying algorithm comes from the US, and it's been around for about 30 years.
Right.
And there are hundreds of thousands of US profiles that we can benchmark against. We've got about 4,000 now that we benchmark.
Wow.
And it's remarkably reliable. One of the profiles is the hunter, which it tends to be female, and they generally have they spend for prestige. So the classic is, I'm a successful lawyer, I need to look the part, and so they spend lots of money on clothes. That's sort of the classic one. Guys would do the same thing with a car.
Yep.
I'm a successful real estate agent, I've got to drive a BMW. So those behaviours generally lead to a spending problem. And that's our number one profile that we get at Life Sherpa. And they tend to be young women in creative or professional jobs.
Gotcha.
And making what per year?
100 plus.
Yeah. Interesting.
So they're not poor, they've got lots of income,
Yeah.
but they've got big spending.
Yes.
And spending that's about this external validation. And when you actually combine that then with values, when you go from personality to values to goals, you actually can change that behaviour. So it's not
Really?
So personality is not in your DNA. It's not fixed for life. It can
That's surface
change
level?
over time. So
It's what's showing up at the time.
yeah.
Well, what would you suggest to someone, to a young female who's making $150,000 a year and she spends all of her money? What would you suggest?
Well, the first step is actually understanding that and why you're doing that. So I don't see it as my role to say, well, look, you shouldn't buy a Kate Spade handbag.
Right.
If you want a Kate Spade handbag, buy a Kate
It's
Spade
probably
handbag.
gone up in price recently.
Probably. It might be collector's items now. But that's not our role as advisors. Our role is to say, well, let's help you understand why you're doing that and understand whether that's adding value to your life.
Right, so you take personality, then you take values, and their values are X, Y, Z, and then you can show them or and say, this is where you're spending your money, and this is what your values are, and then there's a disconnect.
That's right. And that disconnect is what leads to these feelings of angst.
Right.
So, the two most common expressions we hear people, particularly in that sort of late 20s, early 30s, the two big sayings you get is, I just feel like I'm not getting ahead, or why are my friends buying houses and I can't? And the answer is actually around aligning spending and values, because buying a house might not actually be aligned with your values and personality. You might prefer to spend the money on travel or whatever. And it's not our role as advisors. At least I don't see it as our role to say, spending on holidays bad, spending on house good. It's lining the two up. And that's where the personality values. So what's really important to you? So you see lots of people valuing adventure, excitement, where travel's really important. So we've got to help them build a spending plan that takes that into account, but leaves enough for I feel like I'm getting ahead stuff. So, and then that brings you on to goals. And once you've got those three together, you can...
Personality, values, and goals.
And goals in that context is not financial goals. Nobody ever... I've been in this game for a long time. Nobody's ever walked into my office and said, I've got a real goal to save 20% of my income. Right? We fabricated that as part of our strategy or planning, where we sometimes create these financial goals. These goals are all a function of a life goal. So you've got someone who's got a life goal to open a yoga studio. Well, that's going to create a whole bunch of goals. It's going to create some education goals, so you might need to get a certificate. It's going to create some lifestyle goals, like you need to be fit and flexible. And it's going to create a financial goal, because you need some money for rent, you need some money for marketing, you need to keep yourself going while you're doing it. So you put all of that together, and now you've got a plan that aligns with their values.
That sounds remarkable.
It's amazing it's taken me 35 years to get here.
It sounds really good. And you're an ex-accountant.
I'm an ex-accountant.
And now you're off with the fairies. No, I'm kidding. But it sounds amazing, mate. So where did you get all this from, or did you just think it up?
It's come out... there's a huge amount of research gone into it, but it really came out of my previous experience. So my last advice business, which I sold to Mark Boris in 2007...
Holla.
Good timing.
Great time.
December 2007.
Perfect.
Oh my goodness.
That we had 111 clients. All of them had self-managed super fund. All of them had more than $1 million, and all were over 65. And what was I doing for them? Well, did they really care that we made another 35 basis points a year on their investments? No, not really. And some of them particularly valued particular activities. Like we had one woman, she was a retired professor. She was in her 70s, had a 40-year-old boyfriend. And there were two things that she was obsessed about. One, that the boyfriend wasn't going to get the money.
Okay. That's what
That is so funny. Okay.
And two, and this was the one that really did my head in, she wanted a health card.
Because all of her friends.
Perfectly healthy. She'd never been
I paid all my taxes all these years.
Yeah.
I want my bloody health card.
And We got her a health code.
Hi.
I don't think it works anymore, but back then you could do it,
Wow.
and that was what she loved us for. So she was paying us $40,000 a year in fees,
Yes.
and the thing she valued most about this was not our investment expertise or dealing with her RBLs. Don't have RBLs anymore, but
No.
sorting all her
Estate
compliance
planning.
and all that sort of stuff.
Yep.
And all she was obsessed about was this medical code.
Yeah.
And so
And
that's
stopping the funds going to the toy bin.
yeah, and that sort of says, guys, this is not about money.
Yeah.
It's called financial planning, but it's not actually about the money. It's about what we do with it.
Do advisors use the Life Sherpa as an onboarding program?
Our advisors do.
Could
Could other advisors?
can other advisors?
There's no reason why that personality profiler couldn't be made available to other advisors. We haven't today, but it could be.
Okay.
And it could be white labelled for the right
Great.
sort of volumes.
Ooh.
It's
Got to help people along.
or maybe
that
that's something what like XY could consider doing as a service to
interesting.
its members. But anyway, so setting that aside, so that was my epiphany was, well, actually, what am I doing here as an advisor? These are people who've got lots of money, relatively speaking. And am I making a difference to their life? Well, not really. Oh, sure, her medical card was a great story. And she was glad. But, 6 weeks later, that was all water under the bridge. And yet we had this bulk of the population who really needed some help and wasn't able to get it because we as an industry needed to charge an assets under management fee. And 80% of the households in the country have less than $100,000 of non-super assets. So what's the story here? And that was really... And the thing that does...
So that set off a journey.
That set off a journey. And the journey there really is, what do they want and what do they need? And they need help with what we now call living the life you want with the money you have. Mm-hmm. And that last bit is the important point.
I got a much more succinct way of saying that. It's just fund your ideal lifestyle.
Exactly.
Available at all good bookstores.
But not available in the Amazon overseas store. And, we as advisors, what do? We rebranded ourselves as wealth managers and alienated 50% of the population who don't think they have wealth. And that was one of the big things that came out in our focus studies was this group of people said, wealth, what's that? We don't have it. We have money. We have money problems. We have goals and aspirations, but we don't actually have wealth. Now, many of them do have wealth, but not the way...
Wealth is such a
The perception
weird word.
It's a horrible word. I hate it.
It's very subjective.
But it's just so, no one thinks they're wealthy. You ask, you think of someone you think's wealthy, and then ask them if they think they're wealthy, and they'll be
Vince.
like, no. There you go. Perfect example. Right? But if you seriously
The
talk to
goalposts
someone...
keep on moving.
Correct. No one thinks they're wealthy. So, yeah, it's
Are
such
we there yet?
It's such a bad word, isn't it?
It is. And as an industry, right through the 90s and noughties,
Are we
We all-
actually calling them naughties? Are we
I don't know.
Are we comfortable with doing that now?
they're over now.
You can call them whatever you want.
And for a lot of people, they weren't a particularly good decade. But setting that aside, we as an industry rebranded from financial planning or financial advice to wealth management. And what does it mean?
Or are you
don't
saying
know.
it flipped from there to wealth management?
Yeah, well, no one talked about wealth management in the 90s.
Oh.
This is a new rebranding of the industry.
Phenomena. So,
Phenomenal.
So
Well, it's interesting. I was just going to say, interesting when you go out to the accounting world. So we talk to a lot of accountants around financial advice, and when you say financial advice in that world, if you don't bring in wealth, they don't get it. They don't because they're the financial advisors for their clients, which are businesses generally, but a lot of them don't really get this personal financial planner concept. It's yeah, you invest the money. And this is a majority of the accounting world. It's really when you think about how big that is, these guys are the ones that are actually a lot of the potential clients out there are linked to these guys and they actually don't know what financial planning is. So how are you going to get a referral from someone that doesn't get financial planning from a concept standpoint?
Exactly.
So it's just interesting
you just got to follow the money. If you look at the total fees and commissions paid by Australian consumers, it's about $6 billion a year. And less than 20% of that is paid for non-super investment advice.
Non-super?
Less than 20%. 40% of it is paid on debt.
Yes.
And about 30% on risk.
Okay.
And the rest is investment advice. So all of this stuff that we've been focused on for the last 20 years about investment management, something we can't add a lot of value to once you get beyond asset allocation.
Totally.
And it's a tiny part of the revenue pie.
But back in, like, before Life Sherpa days, like, you were picking the best investments, weren't you, Vince?
Well, we did actually run. We ran MDAs before they were trendy. So
But were they, like, was there a value? Like, so, like, there's two ways to run MDAs. There's those MDAs where, like, there's some sort of investment philosophy and then it actually exceeds that and does really well. And then there's the MDAs where, like, it's so confusing that there's no benchmark to assess to. Here's another look at your confusing portfolio every year. And, yeah.
No, we actually spent a lot of time on
one
attribution analysis.
Okay.
We ran it in-house. We actually had an MDA license.
Okay.
In 2003. And we had an internal funds manager who had a broker's assistant and an admin assistant to run the book. And then we had planners who didn't do that. So it was like an internal funds management business. But we did attribution analysis. So we started with a strategic asset allocation, and then every month we tilted it. Mm-hmm. So we looked at, well, what did that tilt actually do, plus or minus?
Yeah.
And then you look at what did your stock selection do, plus or minus?
Okay.
Even down to execution of the trade. So my broker's,
how it was executed.
So my broker's assistant was appraised on how much above or below VWAP for the day that he achieved.
Wow.
What?
So that's some stats collection there.
Well, it goes with the territory. But that was how we looked at it. And we said, well, look, if we're going to do this, we've got to demonstrate that we're adding value.
Yep.
Now, the client wasn't necessarily seeing that as a fee for advice because they paid a single fee, which was tiered. So it wasn't a percentage of AUM, but it was tiered. So obviously the more you had, the more you paid. Mm-hmm. And that included the MDA, your self-managed super fund admin, tax return, audit, a complete one-stop shop. And it was a very profitable business. So it was a good business. But
Did you achieve alpha?
we did.
Did you sell your company based on achieving alpha?
We sold it based on run rate EBIT.
No, sorry. Very nice. But
So did I sell it to the clients?
yeah.
That wasn't a particular, alpha in the pure investment sense, probably not. But if you look back in those days, there was a huge amount of value you could add by looking at RBLs. That's reasonable benefit limits for anyone who's listening.
Yeah, those are like super rules from back in the day where they used to change it every year.
Well, that was before they changed them every year.
Yeah.
That was where they were that way for years until Peter Costello changed it all and changed the world in 2007. Just in time for everyone to tip in $1 million and lose it in the GFC.
Oh, or buy an advice business if you're Mark Morris.
Or indeed buy an advice business. And so there was a huge amount of value you could add from a technical structuring perspective. So that was value that you could clearly demonstrate. And we had quite a few clients who had very large super balances and equally big RBLs.
Are you saying that that you see the system simplified since then?
Yeah, I reckon super in particular is much simpler than it used to be.
So there's less, opportunities to really offer value in that space from a strategic standpoint. That's besides just put more in sort of thing and creating that behaviour change.
Yeah, there is. Okay. That may sound strange to anyone who's lived through the last decade.
Or even most people entering, they're like, oh, they just changed the rules again last year. Like those 1.6 mil, that's created a bit of complexity. Or are you saying that's nothing compared to those RBL days?
No. But bear in mind that a 1.6 million balance limit looks awfully like an RBL.
Yes, that was essentially the same philosophy, wasn't it?
So it's really saying in those days you could put as much as you wanted in, but you could only get tax concessions on your reasonable balance limit.
Yeah.
Reasonable benefit limit, sorry.
Yeah.
Which is sort of...
So they just left it long enough for a whole lot of people to dump shitloads of money on who had no problems supporting themselves in retirement for about, that's over 10 years, isn't it? Yeah. They've just been able to add, what's the max each year? Oh, yeah, let's just put that in the super. It's a good thing because the welfare system would have been overloaded if they weren't able to do that.
Not quite sure how that works. But yeah, that was we went through from the sort of no rules of the 80s to the RBL world in the 90s.
How was that? Actually, can you tell us about this no rule world? It sounds like it'd be fun and maybe like...
before the SIS Act in 91. It was 91, the SIS Act, wasn't it?
I was only born a couple of years before
the self-managed super fund world was the Wild West, and you saw a lot of people with very big balances.
Okay. Because that was when you could just put...
More or less, yeah.
Whatever you wanted into a pretty tax concessional environment.
There was very limited rules. And then we sort of had that tightening up in the SIS Act, and then Costello sort of unwound it all in 2007. So maybe we've just got back to a more complicated way of getting to the same thing. And maybe...
Don't say that all that pain was just for the same outcome. Is that what you're saying, Vince?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a lot of difference between our 1.6 million... What's it called?
Super balance cap?
The balance cap, yeah. Is all that different to an RBL. Albeit it's a flat number, so it's easy to know, so you can just remember 1.6 million.
That's true.
Back then, every person had their own individual RBL.
Yeah, so that kept you working. That gave you a bit of
working, and there was a whole bunch of technical stuff around that you needed to keep right on top of, which is why accountants were particularly good at it.
Well, and the accounting side of things for the personal, like individual situations, there was a lot more things you could do back then. Like really, the restriction on the personal tax minimisation space is really like there's not as much as what could be done back then.
That's right.
Less forestry schemes.
Well, that's probably a good thing. I must admit, I'd always maintained that I'd much rather give the money to the tax office than give it to these guys to plant in trees when I'd never see it again.
That's true.
So because lots of people lost lots of money in those days.
Yeah. So tell us more about the life Sherpa of Wall Street in the 90s.
Is that different to the wolf?
Yeah, up to that end of the 90s.
Yeah, you're tossing small people in the office. Is that what you were up to?
No, it was not. It was no quite that. Although I must admit,
one of my favourite parts of that movie. Yeah.
Although I must admit, when I started in London in 1983, before they deregulated the market over there, so commissions were regulated. So stockbroking commissions. There was a number, I can't remember what it was, but it was the law, so you couldn't compete on price.
Oh, so it was like a set fee, so not a cap.
So the government said, here's the price that you're going to charge as a stockbroker. So everyone charged that and went off to lunch, and a normal lunch involved at least 2 pints of beer every day.
Boom.
And the long lunch was alive and well. And then the American banks came along.
That's like every day?
Yeah.
That sounds like
that's living.
That was it. I mean, the rest of the world wasn't particularly healthy at that time, which I'll get back to in a moment. But then the American banks came in, and they didn't drink at lunchtime.
Oh, that's no fun.
And they moved from the city to Victoria. So was it JP Morgan's? I think it was Morgan's was at Victoria, which is the other end of the city for anyone who's been in London. And they just changed the lunchtime culture. And then they deregulated in 86. So commissions were deregulated. And the city just went wild. And that was the booming 80s, the sort of 80, 85 to...
Well, because it just became so much more competitive.
Yeah.
And the cost of...
And everyone was pumping money in. The Thatcher government was privatising stuff. So everyone was a share owner. And they were developing a whole bunch of new units, apartments in London. The depression of the early 80s was sort of over, and it was boom times. And then, of course, 87 came along, and the property crash in 90, which obviously happened here as well.
What were you doing at the 87 crash?
In the 87 crash, I was actually working for Mobil Oil, and I was travelling the world, but I was heavily exposed to...
so you weren't dealing in the markets yourself? No, you were just exposed
at
to
that point, I was an investor, so I was making... I graduated business school in 86, and started work for Mobil Oil, and travelling through Middle East, Asia, and buying a lot of shares and heavily overexposed. So October 1987, I was in Vienna, and I could see the headlines in German, but I couldn't sort of read them. And this is pre-internet, so it wasn't like your phone told you.
That was the only way you were going to find out.
And so I'm walking down the street to the office and seeing all these big headlines going, it doesn't look very good, but I've got no idea what it means.
All these arrows pointing down.
And so I got into the office and phoned my broker in London and goes, what's happening? And it was pretty hard. It was pretty hard to get through.
How much? What are the losses like in percentage terms?
I think on the first day it would have fallen like 20-30%. So it's
Wow.
I don't think it was as bad as
The GFC.
the day of the GFC, but and it recovered, I think, more quickly. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but the only thing that saved me was the fact that Japan took 2 years to fall. So it taught me the benefits of diversification. So if I hadn't been heavily exposed to Japan,
Right.
I would have been stuffed completely.
Right.
Was there leverage?
There was lots of leverage.
There we go.
Sorry, I just kicked the table there.
That's all right.
So lots of leverage. And
CFDs weren't around back then, but futures contracts were out?
Yeah, well, it was expensive to buy.
So it was more a margin loan, essentially.
So more margin lending.
Oh, so you're really backing it. We've got a baller here.
So
Yeah.
it taught me the benefits of diversification. And in some ways, not having that internet presence helped me manage through it.
Because
You're not getting updates every 5 minutes saying the market's down another 20 points or 30 points or 200 points. You just got to go, well, look, it's down. Now what do I do?
And LCD TV screens weren't everywhere around. So you
Correct.
weren't going, your portfolio's gone down. Do you know your portfolio's gone down? You're just trying to walk
Remember,
away from
MTV had just started.
Yeah.
I don't think Fox News didn't exist. I don't think Sky existed. So
This is a bit of a history lesson for some of the XYs out there.
So I don't want to sound like the old codger in the group, but it was an interesting
young at
time.
heart.
It was an interesting time, and having felt that personal experience, it I think allows me to help people through it in future.
When you know what the risk is
And if
have
you
felt
look,
it.
if you look at Australia, well, we had. So I arrived in Australia in 90, so just to experience the near collapse of Westpac, the collapse of Pyramid Building Society, Tricontinental, so all of the the early 90s was not a particularly happy place, particularly in Victoria.
There's a lot of shifts going on in the economy.
Yeah, and that's the last time we had a real
Was the last down?
depression,
Yeah.
recession. Always nervous about using words like recession and depression. They say the difference is a recession is when you lose your jobs. A recession is when your mate loses his job. A depression is when you lose your job. Forget the economic definition of.
Well, I guess the main point is there hasn't been enough hit to the economic psyche of Australia since then to really, slow, over-exuberance down, you might say.
That's right. So you go from 91, even 99, 2000, which affected the US, didn't really affect us here. The tech crash.
No, when you look at the
didn't
difference,
really
the Aussie
affect
market
you.
hadn't popped up as much, so it wasn't really. We didn't have any tech, so.
Sydney house prices were flat through 95, started to lift and ran till 2003, and then sort of ran flat till 2006, 7. So it was a completely different place, and I'm not sure that Australians are really ready for
They got no idea.
the next one.
Most, like the majority of the population has no idea what the environment, what you would have seen. Like Clay and I don't really know. We may know sort of personal ebbs and flows in terms of our own experiences, but we don't know what an economic sort of hit to a whole society looks like.
I mean, in London, when I arrived in London in September '83, there was a big sign on top of City Hall, counting the unemployment rate, and they changed it every day. So it was 3 million and something, I think, the day I arrived. And that's out of a population. What's London's population? 10 million? It was a big number, and it got bigger every day.
Wow.
And, the miners were on strike, the police were in the streets. It was a very different place. And you go back and look at that now, and you go, that's a really prosperous city full of Russian money, house prices of... back then you could buy a 2-bedroom unit for £30,000, and I don't know what the number is today, but it's a lot more than that.
Shitload.
But it was a depressed time. Interest rates were 12-13%. Inflation was 6 or 7. Unemployment was 7 or 8%. We haven't seen that for forever. Well, not forever, but certainly even the 90s recession wasn't that bad.
And the financial crisis impact economically in Australia was very under, I guess, more subtle than...
It was a financial services recession largely.
Yeah, well, by the sounds of it, they needed a bit of a haircut. Hey, Vince?
Speaking of haircuts.
So I wouldn't mind going, I want to hear some of the stats around. Now that you've got like 4,000 members, I'd love to hear some stats. But what I wouldn't mind is if you can share how the process works with this journey for your clients. Because a lot of advisors, like that's you can have these things that you want to do, but if one of the hardest things is, when do I do it in the process? Do I do it before they come to the meeting? How's it look? Like what's the flow that you go with when you engage with these new clients?
Yeah, I mean, the starting point is usually a Facebook post of some form or another.
Right. A blog or just an advertisement?
Well, they're generally sponsored posts or videos.
Just of you or something else?
We've been... I did the Today Show probably a couple of months ago now.
Yep.
And we've been running that video as a sponsored post, driving people to a landing page to download an ebook on the Life Sherpa's 10 Reasons Why Budgets Don't Work and what you can do about it.
Cool.
And that's just been working its ass off. So that's $3
acquisition cost.
Cost of acquiring an email address for $3. Like, that's just unbelievable. And interestingly, the cost of a female email address is 3/4 of a male cost.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Oh, we'll just cut the gender off, eh? Go down to $1.
So that's the entry point to the funnel.
Do you know how much, or is it too early for the final stat? What's the conversion to clients, and how much does that technically cost when you?
Well, that's the $64 million question. That's still work in progress. Our business plan was based on getting it down to about between 100 and 150 over time.
Yep.
And the first month business plan, we said, well, let's start at just over 1,000. And we're tracking probably ahead of that. But probably the bigger difference, we'd expected to have this big pool of people who were just paying the $15 a month subscription, and a much smaller pool paying something else, whether they bought a home loan or an insurance policy or super advice. So the conversion from member to product has been much, much higher than we'd expected. So although there's been fewer in the pool, there's been more in the product. So we obviously need to do something more on that early engagement piece, which is what we're building at now.
And so people download the book?
Yep. And then they'll get into an email drip, which introduces them to the Life Sherpa 8-step process. Start off with an intro from me, and that takes them through the 8 steps with links out to articles that deal with each of the 8 steps. So the 8 steps are spend less than you earn, build an emergency stash, pay off your debts, sort your super, prepare for the unexpected, which is about risk, get your paperwork sorted, which is around what documentation you need for a home loan, wills, power of attorney, all that sort of stuff. And then you move on to buy and pay off your home and invest your surplus. So it doesn't sound like rocket science, but the process leads people through that, and each one of those has a piece of advice that goes with it.
Right.
So on the spend less than you earn, you might buy a budgeting course, or you might buy some budget spending coaching, pay off your debts. You might buy a debt elimination course.
A Life Sherpa course?
Yep.
Is that that's a video course that you've created, or?
We're building these all out using Thinkific at the moment. So the first one that goes live, which is in limited release at the moment, is our pre-marriage course.
Exciting.
Oh, so you're like a priest.
Well, we call it the money vows, and it's based around 10 conversations you must have before you get married. And they go through, again, personality, values, goals, and move on to dealing with debt.
Well, actually, before we get off that, so
Clayton actually would probably, could you email it to him? He's about to get married, so he's probably going to
So this 8 steps, so someone comes, downloads the ebook, you get their email. At what point, so I understand you're doing these financial 8 steps. At what point do people do this personality and values test?
Well, the personality is very early in that process.
Like step 1 or step 2 or step 3 or whatever?
I think it comes into about email number 2 in the drip.
Right. So
but some people may have come in that way. That's another lead magnet.
That's a link to the
so
quiz.
You're not really putting this as a sequential thing. Do this, do this, do this. Like as far as that those values and all that piece, you're actually blending it in with 8 financial lessons.
That's right.
Right.
And where you come into that point is the interesting bit. So you might have done the quiz in Facebook. So we've been running that as a sort of a giveaway in Facebook, and we've been getting them completed for around $15.
Right.
So it's an expensive acquisition. Well, not expensive, but it's relatively expensive compared to giving an ebook.
Yes.
It doesn't cost as much to do it. There's a small incremental cost, but it doesn't cost that much. And it gets a lot of buy-in.
Yep.
So you answer the quiz. There's 28 statements that you agree or disagree with. So it's no personal information.
And who developed this thing for you?
So the underlying algorithm we licensed out of the US.
Cool.
There's a psychologist called Kathleen Gurney who developed it in the early 80s.
Right.
And it's been used by some of the big advice groups in the US.
So you're white labeling that?
Yeah. So we've sort of Australianized it, and
sure.
So we just use the underlying algorithm.
But you've just got more swearing.
So we answer the questions. We host the questions. We send off the answers, and that comes back with a series of results.
Yep.
And we then take those results and massage it into our report. So
Great.
the report you get is a Life Sherpa report, which reflects our personality and branding and those sort of things. And we started by giving that away on Facebook, which gets a lot of buy-in. So you've got someone who agrees or disagrees with 28 questions, and there's no real personal information in it, so people feel relatively unthreatened by it. But we actually know quite a lot about someone who's done a money personality test. So we know what your hot buttons are. So we know what the things, whether you're going to be driven by aspiration or by fear or by
right.
So,
and then what do you do with that?
Then our drip program is then tailored based on that.
Oh, wow.
So
So you trigger your this personality, therefore you get this
set
email.
of emails.
That's great.
Right.
They're sort of the same emails, but they're just slightly...
This is kind of like the announcer thing of how do you like to be communicated to? And then just simply asking them and then giving them documentation based on how they like to be. But you're sort of dressing it up a little bit fancier and offering a little bit more value within that questionnaire.
That's right, and it also drives our advice process. So if you score really high on an involvement score, your classic teachers and engineers, we'll give you more information in your statement of advice.
Wow!
So
man, this is
what I was talking about the other way.
This is a theme, hey?
So so for someone who profiles as an optimist or a hunter, we'll go, look, Clayton, the answer is A for these reasons.
Yep.
If you profile with a high involvement score, like a producer or an achiever, we'll go, look, the answer is A for these reasons. But we also looked at B, C, and D and eliminated them for these reasons.
Right.
And that actually heads off a lot of those questions.
I mean, you're going to get them anyway.
Yeah, so anyone who's had an engineer as a client will know the level of almost second-guessing the client gives of your advice.
Yeah.
So they want to know every in and out and what every fee is.
To be fair, you get questioned regardless of their personality, Paddy.
It's not true, Clayton. They all trust me. I just want to know more details, that's all.
Patty did provide us with our first Sherpa. So our first advisor came from the Patty Academy of Real World Financial Planning.
One of the many businesses that Patty's got in his rucksack.
So that's where the...
Sort of all he knows, except for the bad stuff.
So that could be where you come in. You might come in on the money personal, but wherever you end up in this 8-step drip, which I think has got about 12 emails.
And people will fill some out and not others out.
So where they react to those. So in each one it says, look, here's what step 1 is, and you'll know you've mastered this when you A, B, C, D, E.
Awesome.
And each of those has got a hyperlink to an article.
Very cool.
And
that you've written.
That's hosted on the website.
Do they have to do it before they meet you, or either video, or so? There's not a requirement for it to happen before.
Of course not. It's captured off the internet. Yeah. Keep going.
No, I mean, like if they haven't done that course and they come to you, will you require them to do the quiz before you talk to them more, like have a meeting?
You mean the money personality test? Yes. That will always be done as a precursor to the first discovery meeting.
And does that guide, so we've talked about it guiding like communication, does it guide how the meeting goes as well?
Yeah, it will guide how it's not all that formal, and perhaps that's something we need to do a bit more work on, but it will guide. So an advisor looking at that goes, well, my client is a hunter. So I have a fair feeling about what and it is usually her hot buttons are, and therefore I need to hit these off, and I need to tailor my communications to line up with those expectations.
Very cool.
So, do you think it makes it a lot more efficient?
Yeah, I think the biggest contributor to the efficiency argument is that the member or client has made some pre-judgments before they come to that discovery meeting.
Yeah.
So having worked their way through the various tools on the website, they've actually made a sort of buying decision. So they've realised, oh look, my budget's out of control, I need some help, or actually this income protection stuff, that's something I should have a look at. So the advice process is then a coaching and customer service exercise rather than a sales and education exercise.
Yep.
And that's where the cost is. So the cost of sitting with a client and going, this is what life insurance is, this is what TPD means, this is what income protection is, that costs a lot of money. So if you need to make $300 an hour for an advisor time, so if they're making $100 an hour, you need to be making $300. So how do I do that? You can't do that unless you're going to be charging them an asset under management type fee, or
a high fixed fee,
which means they need a relatively high income to be willing to pay it.
Well, that's not a bad segue into actually sharing like how cost competitive you guys are.
Before we get there, I would love to just get through these emails. Sure. So we haven't actually. So
they just keep on going. They just keep on splitting.
So there's about 12 of them. So there's an intro. This is who I am and why Life Sherpa is what it is, and why I set up Life Sherpa. Then there's the 8, and interspersed in them there's a couple of points like a little point about, well, if you've already got life insurance, why not set us up as your advisor so that we can rebate commissions or give you the advice and manage claims. If you've got a home loan, you say, well, look, if you've had your home loan for more than 2 years, it's time to have a look at refinancing. So there's a little bit of product stuff in the middle of that stuff. And then when you get to the end, which I think is email 12 off the top of my head, there's now that you've read that, here's some things you could consider doing today. Like go and complete your Freedom Factor quiz, go and read this, try this, or look at these areas of your life. And then, so through that process, our primary goal is to get them to subscribe to a $15 a month subscription or buy a course. That's the goal of that exercise.
Which can happen at any point.
Any point on that, based on what triggers their fancy.
And then let's say they don't do a course, but let's say they sign up to the $15 per month. What do they get for that?
That gets them access to all of the tools on the website, which is really around, well, there's a whole bunch of resources around education and ebooks and all that sort of stuff, which is slowly being turned into video. There's access to an advisor to ask questions, so you can email your Sherpa and say, I've just got this tax bill. What do I need to do about it? Should I pay off my HEX? There's a whole bunch of questions we get. A lot of them are around this whole HEX. Creates a lot of angst. And access to our commission rebate program. So if you've already got a life policy, so if you're already paying a $4,000 a year premium, you'll actually get more rebate than you'll pay us for $15. So that's the low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
So they will. That's almost a no-brainer.
Yes.
Although it does take a bit of explaining. Because first of all, you've got to explain commissions, and then you've got to explain, well, actually, we can give it back to you. And actually, your commissions are paying for advice.
How many people don't know that there's a commission there, or I guess that's a question.
I would say, well, probably more than half to most.
Yep.
I think people realise it when they're buying the product.
But they forget about it.
But 5 years into a life policy, I don't think many. Certainly, our experience is that you've actually got to explain to them that there is commissions, and that 10 to 20% of your premium is going in commissions, which is actually supposed to be paying for advice. Now, are you getting the advice you're paying for? So we're not saying that commissions are inherently bad, but it's there for a reason, and it's there for a reason because it's supposed to pay for annual review. So when your statement comes out and says, inflation is 3% this year, your limit's just gone up, is that right? Is that appropriate? And to deal with claims. And that's the bit that most people don't focus on. And it's a hard message to deliver. If you're selling risk, I'm sure you'd understand that. So most people don't really get this. So there's a bit of education. So through the emails, we're saying, well, look, here's how the system works. Make sure that you're getting value for what you're paying. So they may have, and in most cases, they've been to see an advisor many years ago who they've never heard of since. And most of them are actually quite gobsmacked to realise, actually, I'm still paying that guy money. And I guess that was the education piece.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
And similarly with your home loan. So you start with a home loan and you go, well, if you've had a home loan for 2 years, someone's probably getting trail on that. And the bank's not rewarding your loyalty, so now let's have a look at that. So they're the sort of the low-hanging fruit that trigger people to do something today. It's very hard to get someone to deal with their will or estate planning today.
Yeah.
They say the best time to write your will is, well, if you know when you're going to die, it's the day before.
Right.
If you don't know when you're going to die, it's today. But giving that piece of advice to somebody is really, really hard and difficult as a leading.
And so you've basically just got two revenue models, one for $15, one for courses. Is there anything else that you do?
So our revenue is largely in three thirds, if you like. There's subscriptions and courses. Mm-hmm. There's home loans. Mm-hmm. And there's life policies.
Yep.
And they're the three. And then there's a handful of stuff from car buying, health insurance, personal loans.
Well, you do courses on them?
No, that's actual transactions.
Oh, right. So you do general insurance as well?
Yeah, we got a license to deal in general insurance.
Right.
We don't do personal advice on general insurance. But if you go and look at a typical 30-year-old, well, where's the money being spent? The three decisions that drive where your budget goes is where you live, what you drive, and what you owe. So if we can't deal with those three, we're missing out on big chunks of people's lives. So where you live is around how much home is right, and the answer is usually buy real estate, not too much when the time is right, and so getting the right purchase price is the fundamental to that question. So not spending too much, and how you fund it. And I said that's 40% of all fees and commissions paid by Australians for financial services. And then you move into obviously insurance, debt elimination because that's where you owe, and the car.
And so you don't actually do personal financial advice?
Yeah, we do.
You do?
Yep.
With that $15 a month?
No, not for $15 a month. So each piece, so that gets you access to general questions. So if someone's got, should I pay off my HEX? You get a response to that. But anything that needs a statement of advice or a credit guide, so anything that's real advice in that traditional sense, there's a fee associated with that.
It's when Big Vince steps out.
And that's either a fixed fee. So if you want to, what should I do at my super? Well, that's a fixed fee for that.
Sure.
For home loans and insurance, it's a fixed fee taken from the commissions.
Yep.
So we've effectively turned all these variable commissions into fixed fees.
Really? And then and then you rebate the rest.
the excess.
Cool. Wow, mate, it's a very complex, multifaceted offering that you've got here.
Yeah, and it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, it's very, very holistic on many, many levels.
That's right. And to get the cost down, so we've taken a holistic approach by developing a holistic framework and then delivering individual pieces of advice within that.
This sounds like Adrian Paddy's dream.
Hey, I'm going to say that I haven't been getting a little bit excited by what Vince has been saying.
So all pieces of advice are single topic.
Right.
So if you want a piece of super advice, you get a statement of advice around super. You want risk? A risk statement of advice.
Right.
You want a home loan? You get a credit.
And then each thing is, the rest is scoped out.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
okay.
each piece, it's within an overall framework though. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably the important point. So I think about it as holistic advice delivered sequentially.
And what punches out the advice?
We have a very large machine called Salesforce.
Salesforce punches out your advice.
You using Conga?
We're using Conga, yes.
A little bit of Conga?
What are you paying for your Salesforce per year?
It's a personal question.
Salesforce is actually the cheap bit.
What?
Pardot, which is our marketing
Oh,
automation,
you
is the
use
expensive
Pardot.
bit.
That's like $1,000 a month or something.
Yeah, so our Salesforce bill is about $150 per seat per month or per quarter.
But you've done a lot of customizations for that, yeah. So that's like, if we want to quantify how much Vince has spent in, depending on what hourly rate you want to use, it's not a cheap piece of software, arguably. Yeah.
There's $1 million of development spend on our balance
Pimp
sheet.
my ride sort of thing. Yeah.
Over about 4 years.
Yeah, right. Okay. $1 million
About $1 million.
spent or just your time?
No, that's actual cash spent.
Oh, $1 million to set up
About
your
$1 million.
CRM.
Well, so CRM is it's the whole business. So that includes, building all the website, building out
Does
all
that
these tools.
include? Oh, that includes, say, the results to the questionnaires.
Yeah,
and
all of that stuff. So
and-
the total spend on what I would call development stuff,
yes.
which is a combination
Okay, so $1 million to set up the business, basically, give or take.
over about 4 years. Some of which was provided by the government through the R&D grant system.
Hell yeah.
Well, yes, you would have needed to have a very tailored. We looked into that for what I've been doing, and if you're not spending, it's essentially if you're not spending enough on customizing something, you can't qualify. If you want to do it a bit more sort of, arguably some might say efficiently, depending on what state of affairs you're looking for.
Paddy gets a couple of programs, sticks Zapier in between. He's like, what? Well, is this not
Boom,
enough?
done.
No,
Give me the millions.
it's more about starting with, say, you got to do some research or work that you couldn't have known the answer to before.
Yes, it's very scientific. The qualifier.
So this is all about saying, well, how do we know that people will actually follow this stuff online, and can we actually build financial competency and skills?
Why didn't I take that path? I should.
So not all of this spending is eligible. So a lot of this, all the website stuff.
Oh, and they map it to, and
So
then they take it away if it doesn't match up if they do an audit as well.
That's
So
right.
you sort of.
So all the website stuff's all built offshore. So none of that's eligible expenditure.
Well, mate, it sounds very interesting what you've got. Can advisors, and we touched on this before, can advisors use any of the tools and things that you've built?
Right now, that's probably really hard. We are looking at a bunch of ways that we could expand the use of these tools and make them more usable to individuals. Like white labeling the money personality test is probably the first one that we would look at. But the big project that we're working on at the moment is to try and create local providers of the Life Sherpa way. So if you think about Life Sherpa as being online, it's like the gym. But there's a huge number of people who actually want a personal trainer. So we are looking, and this is still work in progress, about how we could in effect, of endorsed local providers, like accredited Life Sherpa coaches who could deliver all of this stuff one-on-one locally. So using the methodologies, using the back office tools, and but delivering it to their clients one-on-one. There's a whole bunch of sort of decisions has to be made as to how you actually do that. So you look at, well, who would make a good Life Sherpa accredited coach? Well, it's someone who, they might be a life coach. They might do property or wealth, so-called wealth coaching. They might be financial advisors who want to do a more coaching-based approach. Or they could even be mortgage brokers. Now, each of those has got slightly different needs. So for a life coach, they're obviously not qualified to do financial advice, so we'd need to do all of the product advice stuff in back office. And obviously share the revenue that way. For an advisor, someone who's actually qualified to be IG 146 or whatever the modern equivalent of that's going to be.
I think that's been blown out of the water.
Well,
recently.
that technically doesn't exist anymore. At least the register doesn't exist. They might benefit from becoming an authorised rep of Money Sherpa, which is our licensee, but still trying to work that through. But it would start with a coaching course and then some sort of ongoing
I've got
support.
400 or so mates looking for a for a job recently. So
it's obviously someone who has that approach wants to take that approach with their clients.
So you'd be open to ex-Dover guys coming knocking?
That's right.
Okay.
I mean, we put that out. Obviously, it doesn't suit everyone. We have a very specific offering.
Does everyone have to wear that laundry tax deduction shirt right there?
No, they are available. We have them in the merch shop. You can buy T-shirts, polo shirts.
Holla!
The Life Sherpa merch shop is open for business.
Woo!
But yeah, so someone who comes from a traditional, I think a lot of Dover advisors may have come from an accounting background, and financial planning was an add-on to the business. Probably might not suit that sort of, but an advisor who's focusing on the younger clientele with less of an investment advice focus, we could suit. So happy to have a chat to anyone who's listening.
Awesome, man. And so what's the best way for them to get in contact?
You can call 1300 My Sherpa or get on the lifesherpa.com.au website and submit a Ask You Sherpa question.
Awesome, man. Well,
or we have
you.
intercom on the website. You can get on the
You've
chat
got
line.
intercom on the website.
And interestingly, this blows me away. The most common response, it pops up and says, is there anything we can help you with today? And the number of people who type in, no, just browsing, thanks, is huge.
Does that tell you stop bothering people?
It just... that and...
That's counted as good, but because you've gotten some engagement.
Yeah.
That's the first touch point.
It was just not expected. And the most common financial question is, can I get HEX if I'm bankrupt? Don't ask me why.
Okay.
That's hilarious.
Do you have a bot on there?
On
the
website, on the intercom.
The messenger, the intercom.
Yeah, intercom. Well, it only asks the first question automatically.
Oh, you got to have all the...
Oh, let's not get him started. All right, mate. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, Vince.
Thank you.